Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is History of Magic. Today I'll be talking about one of the biggest glow-ups in Magic history, the true, heartwarming, rags-to-riches story of Dark Depths and its meteoric rise from unplayable chaff to multi-format all-star. Ready? Let's get started. Dark Depths was originally printed in Cold Snap, and to really understand some of the history and context behind this card, it's important to know a couple of facts about how this set came to be. Magic sets used to be grouped together into blocks that all shared a setting, storyline, and generally some number of block mechanics. Magic's first block consisted of the sets Ice Age and Alliances, but every other block after that had 3 sets, so Homelands was officially shoehorned in as the third set of the Ice Age block sometime after the fact, despite having no thematic or mechanical connection to the other 2 sets. Around a decade later, WotC announced that they had found a long-lost design file for the actual third set of this block, and they were going to develop it into a new set, Cold Snap. Now, WotC dropped the story about the full design file that they somehow all lost and forgot about pretty quickly since it didn't stand up to scrutiny in any way, but they did actually design Cold Snap to feel like it was really the third set in this block, expanding on the flavor, storyline, and mechanics of Ice Age and Alliances. You can see this in various ways on the card Dark Depths itself. For example, Merit Lage, the token that it creates, was an existing storyline character, a powerful Cthulhian entity that was referenced in the names and flavor text of other cards in the Ice Age and Alliance sets. Also, it's a snowland. Snow-covered counterparts for all the basic lands were part of the original Ice Age set, as well as various cards that interacted with this status in various ways. Cold Snap took this opportunity to smooth out a few things about how the rules worked with snow permanents and explored the design space by introducing non-land snow permanents and snow costs and cards that cared about this mechanic in new ways. Discerning players may have noticed that Dark Depths cannot tap for mana itself, and this is another throwback. By Cold Snap, mana was a core part of land's identity as a card type, and thus every land printed was able to tap for mana itself or at least contribute to your mana base. In the time of Ice Age, though, this was not so, and lands that did not tap for mana were a regular occurrence. Now, as cool and flavorful of a card as Dark Depths was, at the time of its printing it was, and there's no easy way to say this, pretty rancid. 30 mana is a heck of a lot, even if you can pay in installments, and although the token being indestructible gave it some measure of protection, there was a small but relevant handful of cards that could cleanly deal with the token, meaning that all your hard work might just be for nothing. This reflected the design philosophy of the time, which occasionally printed offbeat, situationally powerful cards as a deck-building challenge. Unlike today, it was not expected that there would be a workable solution for this challenge, packaged in the same precon that you just got the fun build-around-me card in, or even that it would necessarily exist at all. And so, true to form, Dark Depths slumbered for 3 years in the bulk bins of game stores, universally regarded as unplayable chaff, until one fateful day during the spoiler season for Zendikar 1 when it got to meet its new best friend. A lot of cards that go from bad to good have sort of a gradual transition, where some intrepid deck builder notices the card solves some problem that they're facing, proves the concept in a few major tournaments, and then the Magic populace gradually warms up to it and recognizes the card. Not so here. Vampire Hexmage really single-handedly transformed Dark Depths from unplayable bulk to Tier 1 staple overnight. As soon as Hexmage hits the internet, people were buzzing. I remember that one day I saw the one last playset of Dark Depths on Fine Magic cards, which is what we had instead of TCG Player at the time, priced at $3 a piece, and considered buying them. All the other copies had risen to over 20. I ultimately decided against it for fear that the seller wouldn't ship, a concern that was no less valid back then, and I did not personally acquire my playset until much later. So it's not hard to see how this works, right? Getting rid of all 10 ice counters is a lot easier with this one weird trick than trying to do it one by one the old-fashioned way. At this time in Magic's history, the design space around moving and removing counters was much less explored, and all the previous solutions were either too slow or too expensive to be worth considering. Vampire Hexmage threatening a 2020 on turn 3, or even turn 2 with help from Urborg, was actually competitive viable, and decks built around the combo quickly emerged and extended. If you're not familiar with that format, it was sort of like a super standard that existed back then, comprising the last 7 years of standard sets. The Dark Depths combo deck achieved good results, and many top players spent months trying to determine the best shell. Eventually, Jerry T came up with the idea of mashing a Dark Depths deck up with the other main combo deck of the format, one built around Sword of the Meek and Thopter Foundry. It ended up fitting perfectly, with the go wide Thopter strategy rendering the often specific removal spells that could deal with Merit Lage useless, and the Dark Depths angle being immune to Graveyard Hate, which was the standard answer for the Thopters. The fact that all the combo pieces cost 2, meaning they could all be found with a Muddle the Mixture, an otherwise serviceable counterspell that fit nicely into the blue-black control shell, well, that was icing on the cake. The resulting Thopter Depths deck dominated the format for the next year until Extended was redefined to include only 4 years worth of sets, kicking Dark Depths out. Modern was introduced a year later in 2011, but Dark Depths was included in the initial ban list for that format. Unlike Sword of the Meek, which got unbanned in 2016, Dark Depths has never been legal in Modern. So if its time in Extended was over and it was banned in Modern, well, what else is left? How about Legacy? Well, Dark Depths was definitely powerful, but getting the token in Legacy wasn't as much of a sure win as it was in Modern or Extended, due to the wider card pool, including answers like Karakas and Swords to Plowshares, which were already widely played. In particular, one specific card was so popular and answered the combo so well that it conclusively relegated Dark Depths to a fringe strategy. As you can see, Dark Depths makes the big payoff contingent on sacrificing it. If you can't sacrifice Dark Depths at the time its ability resolves, for example, because it got destroyed by a Wasteland, then you don't get a 20/20. Wasteland was a 4 of in many Tier 1 decks and was right up there with Brainstorm for being the most popular card in the format. And so, out of Extended, banned in Modern, and unsuited for Legacy, Dark Depths entered its quiet retirement. Grateful it had finally managed to achieve the relevance and tournament success most of the rares from its set could only dream of. And then a couple of years later, in February 2013, Gatecrash was printed, and included in this set was the card that would give Dark Depths a brand new lease on life. It's not quite as obvious how this combo works, so if you've never seen this one before, the idea is you use the Thespian stage bottom ability to make it into a copy of Dark Depths. Copy effects do not copy any counters that were on the thing that's being copied, and the Thespian stage is already on the battlefield when it becomes a copy, so once that copy ability resolves, you'll have a Dark Depths that has 10 ice counters on it, and a Thespian stage with none. Since Dark Depths is legendary, you'll need to put 1 in the graveyard. As noted earlier, you don't get the 20/20 unless you actually sacrifice, so you need to choose the Thespian stage to stick around and bin the actual Dark Depths. You can then sacrifice the Thespian stage and get a Merit Lage token. Maybe you're wondering why this card was so helpful. Having another combo piece is great and all, but this version of the combo is still stopped by Wasteland. And to answer that, we'll need a little bit of background on the Legacy format. The Lands deck is a control/prison deck that popped up shortly after the printing of Life from the Loam in Ravnica 1. The deck originally based on the synergy between life and cycling lands. So you use cards like Exploration and Mana Bond to get a bunch of lands in play, and then you lock the opponent out with recurring wastelands and tapping all their basics with Rishadan Ports. There was one major problem with this deck though. It was excruciatingly slow. After the lock was established, if the opponent didn't scoop, victory would hopefully come many turns later after chipping away with manlands or a Punishing Fire Grove of the Burn Willows combo. And I said hopefully because every turn was one more chance for the opponent to top deck a Surgical Extraction and wriggle out. Everything changed when Thespian Stage was printed. Well, okay, nothing actually changed right then because at the time Thespian Stage was printed, the Legend rule worked a little differently. If there were multiple legendary permanents with the same name in play, they would all go to the graveyard. Players had to wait a few months later until Magic 2014 when the Legend rule was changed to the one that we have today in order for the combo to work as I described earlier. But once that happened, the deck got an enormous shot in the arm. The new combo fit into the deck perfectly. Both combo pieces being lands meant that they could both be tutored for with crop rotation, and they could both be recovered with Life from the Loam if the first try didn't succeed. Cards that the deck was already playing. The possibility to win in one hit meant fewer drawn games and a better chance to fight back against historically difficult fast combo matchups like Ad Nauseam and Show and Tell. Current versions of lands don't run manlands and often eschew Punishing Fire, but they all rely on the threat of Merit Lage as their primary win condition. In fact, the Legacy community took note of how well this was working for lands, and they started to wonder if maybe this combo had what it takes to compete by itself. New Turbo Depths decks started showing up that went all in on the combo, with discard to clear the way, main deck Pithing Needles to fight through Wastelands and Karakas, land tutors like Sylvan Scrying and Expedition Map, and fast mana like Lotus Petal and Elvish Spirit Guide to help you go off as soon as possible, all backed up by Not of This World and Sajiri Step to protect the Merit Lage, the latter of which could be fetched at instant speed with crop rotation. This deck had one goal, to make and connect with a 20/20 before the opponent had a chance to react. Oren Kremen piloted such a deck to a first-place finish at the NA Eternal Weekend in 2016, proving conclusively that it wasn't just a gimmick. And would you believe after all that, Dark Depths stock went up yet again. This last moment wasn't as transformational as the ones that I've talked about so far, but it does mark another significant change that helped shape Dark Depths into the card it is today. Like the previous one, it comes from a change in Magic's rules, specifically this one that tells you how replacement effects apply as permanents are entering the battlefield. I've made a whole video about this rule before, so for today I'll just give a high-level overview of the part that's relevant to Dark Depths. When an object enters the battlefield, sometimes replacement effects apply that change how it enters. Common examples include having something enter tapped, or, as with Dark Depths, entering with counters on it. Now, in order to apply to that event, the game needs to check to see if there are any replacement effects like this before the event actually happens, i.e. before Dark Depths enters the battlefield. There's just one issue. Let's say there's a Blood Moon in play. Now, if you've played with or against this card before, you probably know that Blood Moon makes all non-basic lands lose their normal abilities. But Blood Moon only applies to non-basic lands that are on the battlefield. That being the case, its effect does not apply to Dark Depths at the time when the game is checking to see if there's any replacement effects that should apply to it entering. So Dark Depths enters with 10 ice counters, just like it normally would. Now, this ruling confused a lot of people since the thing that makes you get 10 ice counters is an ability, and it's weird for an ability that a permanent does not have while it's on the battlefield to affect how it looks or what happens when it enters the battlefield. And so Wizards changed this rule in Ixalan 1, such that continuous effects that apply to the permanent when it's on the battlefield are able to be taken into account during that process. You can find a link to my video on this topic in the description, but for today, let's just look at the consequences this change had for the situation of Blood Moon plus Dark Depths, which is that the Blood Moon is able to suppress the ability of Dark Depths that makes it enter with ice counters. And that's how it works even now. If you play Dark Depths when there's a Blood Moon out, it enters with 0 ice counters on it. You don't get the Merit Lage right away because Blood Moon also takes away the ability that does that, but as soon as Blood Moon leaves the battlefield, that ability will come back and trigger at that time. This is an important interaction for Lands players to be familiar with, because guess what sideboard card tends to come in a lot when you're playing against a deck where over half the cards are non-basic lands? Blood Moon was historically pretty crippling against the Lands deck, and many other decks' entire plan for the matchup was to basically just play this one hate card against them. Before the rules changed, getting rid of the Blood Moon would mean that you got back to a point where you could still play Magic again, but you still had a lot of catching up to do. Now, dealing with the Blood Moon might also bring a 2020 to the grand reopening party, threatening to end the game on the next turn, an interaction that I commissioned in graphical form for this attractive Judging for the Win playmat. Click below if you'd like to order one of your own. And so that brings us to where we are today. Dark Depths started out as an unplayable junk rare, predating all of the commonly used rules and cards that people use these days to shortcut their way to the big payoff. Vampire Hexmage single-handedly pulled Dark Depths directly out of the trash can and onto center stage as the principal boogeyman of Extended. And after that, Thespian stage gave it a new home and legacy. The rules change with Blood Moon was icing on the cake. Today, Dark Depths has an impressive resume of finishes at the highest level of play and remains a mainstay of Legacy lands and banned in Modern, where, even with rampant power creep, it would still probably be a Tier 1 deck if it was allowed. In my opinion, things are only looking up for Dark Depths since moving and removing counters, once considered a literal unset mechanic, has been established as a design space Wizards is more and more comfortable exploring. Who knows when some shiny new card will show up that ushers in the new age of Merit Lage. Because, as we've seen before, sometimes all you need to go from garbage to greatness is just one friend who believes in you. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.